Okay, good morning. Good morning. We are live. We're doing it differently today. I'm just going to talk because, as much as I love having conversations with you, I decided to do this earlier, but live, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to relaunch this at the usual time. Good morning. I'm still full of cold, which is ridiculous, I know, because it seems to have been going on for weeks. But I just want to say welcome to Belonging in Business. And this week we are discussing belonging in business through acting. Yeah. So we're going to deep dive into that in a minute, but I just want to suggest that acting is definitely a way forward. Now, today I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you about a guy called Stephen Ball, who's actually an educator. I'm going to be talking about living this process, being actively participatory in this process, and the ways that we can foster engagement, well-being, diversity, and inclusion, which is a subject that I know you know is close to my heart. I'm Mandy-Jayne, and for those that haven't listened to me before, I am a disabled business owner in the UK who creates opportunities for individuals who have disabilities. And I do that through the medium of workfulness. I'm a teacher. I'm a SENDCO, so I'm a special educational needs disability coordinator. It means I have an MA in specific educational needs like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, you name it, PDA, you name it. There's even mental health. I'm also psychotherapeutically trained, and I am further training as a social worker. So when I say I'm going to talk about Stephen Ball actually is a teacher, and I came across him during my first master's degree in online and distance education. And Stephen Ball says that we need to be actors. That's policy actors. What do I mean by policy actors and becoming a policy actor, and why is it, I believe, pivotal in us understanding how we foster belonging in business and other sectors, of course. So, what Stephen Ball says, and I've been listening, talking around him for a number of years, over a decade certainly, is that professionals are not just policy implementers. We don't just deliver policy, but actually we are imperative to its formulation and evolution. And I think that in this regard, I have always known that becoming a policy actor meant that I could impact on policy and therefore impact on practice. And that's what I've been trying to do for 25 years. I say trying, it's what I've been achieving for 25 years. So, acting as a policy actor means living our policy intention. I think many of us, in fact, I was talking to somebody yesterday who said, I'll never ever vote. And I said, well, I need you to be involved. So how do I change that? I hear what you're saying about who and what and how you think of politicians and what you think they stand for and whether you think they are living the policy intentions that they discuss. But what can I do to involve you, to include you? And she said, well, it's different if it was you, MJ, because you do what you say. You live what you state. You are what it says on the tin. If it was you, I would vote because you wouldn't stand for these shenanigans. You would uncover what was going on. They wouldn't let you in. But if you were there, then it would be you that I would vote for. And in fact, another lady in the same conversation said, no, it's that we don't believe in what they stand for because they don't include everybody. I think there is a space, a place emerging, but we will see when that is. You know, they asked me in the Senate last time I went, because that's the other thing. When I'm talking about politics, there's some reasons why I'm doing this, okay? I'm part of something called Equal Power, Equal Voice, and Elect Her. There's an Elect Her campaign. Equal Power, Equal Voice is to help individuals where their voice is missing in politics to get a seat at the table. So I am being exposed to lots of training and collaboration and networking and visits to the Senate and the House of Lords, UK Parliament, you name it, in order that we can understand how all of that works, what the influences are, what our ways in are, and for us to network and be mentored by somebody already in that field. So living policy, to be a policy actor, means to embody the principles and goals of the policies that we advocate for. And I've just been writing a social policy portfolio for my training. So it's something I've just been studying. So it's really pertinent for me at the moment. So it's not just about making sure that what we intend to produce is policy, but that actually when we produce a policy, the whole point of a policy is that it is a living, says Stephen Ball, a living, breathing and evolving process that impacts real lives. Wales has a new policy discussion for the next 10 years to develop a 10-year policy strategy for mental health called Connecting the Dots. And it states as one of the outcomes of what it sees is necessary is that we need a cross-sector and indeed, I believe, a cross-party response to connecting the dots, collaboration across teachers, social workers, employers, politicians, heads of state, and of course, third sectors must collaborate because each sector does have a unique perspective in shaping and implementing policies. And so we need all those voices at the table. When we have a multidisciplinary approach or a multifaceted approach or everybody being included, well, it just means that we hear all the voices, important voices, particularly the ones that were missing previously. This needs active participation. For me, there is no point in me becoming a social worker or being a SENDCO. So I state politically that I stand up for specific educational needs and disabilities. So I stand up for the 1 in 5, for the 26.4% of people that experience disability. And remember, disability is a physical, mental, or psychological or learning difference that substantially affects us on a day-to-day basis for longer than 26 weeks. That's the definition of disabled. So, active participation. It means that all of these individuals, including myself, need to be actively participating in policy. And to do that, I have to show up. So on the 6th of December, I am going to Senate, to talk about is Wales fairer? And we are talking about statistics and all sorts in Wales on that night. And it's the Equalities and Human Rights Commission that have invited us there. Because to actively participate in that policy allows me to give feedback, allows others to give feedback and promote change, because things need to change. That's what the Connecting the Dots report shows, that in spite of the fact that we've moved away from the medical model, and the medical model, remember, says that my deficiency is my responsibility, I am impaired and I cannot fit in the world because of my impairment. But the social model of disability, something that's moved on from that now, is that My impairment needs to be accommodated in the world. It is the fact that there are no lifts or accommodations for wheelchairs that mean I can't move through the world. It's not the fact that I move through the world on wheels. It's that the world hasn't accommodated my wheels. That's a social model of disability. And we knew this year, actually, that over half of the Welsh Government only understood the medical model and didn't yet understand what the social model is. And policy needs to be written from a social model perspective. Now, if the Welsh Government don't know what a social model is, how can policy be written from a social model, inclusive, anti-oppressive, everybody at the table perspective? Well, I don't think it can. So this is a proactive stance, isn't it? This is me stating what I think should actually happen, because it transforms us from being recipients passively receiving policy to being dynamic agents of change. Now, how do we do this? Because it's all right having all these ideas, isn't it? I'd like to change. I'd like everybody to be included. It's all idealistic. Oh, well done, MJ. You've got an idea of everybody being included, but how realistic is it? Well, we've got to begin. Yeah, come on. With education. We have to go back to education. I know I'm a teacher, and therefore I'm going to say that. And I never wanted to be a teacher. My mum was a teacher, and I avoided it. I became a nursery nurse first, so that I could nanny. I did my NNEB, Nursery Nurses Examination Board, I think they called it, the NNEB, way back when I was a 16-year-old, because I didn't want to be a teacher. Why? I don't know, but I didn't. But education, because implementing policies that create inclusive educational and workplace environments means that we already begin with everybody at the table. It's okay having special educational needs schools, but very often that creates silos. And the other thing it does is it removes all the disabled children from the classroom, which means that the classroom doesn't look like the world, and the world doesn't look like the classroom. Sorry, lost my train of thought for a second there. To foster belonging in the classroom, to become policy actors, for education to impact life, the policy needs to be written that education and workfulness are the ways through to policy change. That means that we need accessibility measures. We have to know that schools are accessible to everybody. We have to know that workplaces can become accessible to everybody. Because this supports everybody. Diverse needs included. Yeah. The second way, so education, and policy that writes that we must make education and workfulness inclusive. That involves promoting access to work, the Access to Work programme. That involves helping those 26.4 people to engage in workfulness. It means we must include our disabled children in the classroom, and the classroom environment needs to become inclusive of all types of learning, all types of learners. It needs to be a multifaceted way of teaching. It needs to be doing and speaking and listening and engaging and drama and outside and inside. It cannot be just chalk and talk, because not very many people actually respond to that kind of teaching. But immersive, engaged teaching, that's when we That's when we light the fire of finding somebody's raison d'etre, finding a child's preference, finding their niche, what Erikson refers to as finding their niche. Erikson was a child development theorist. Finding their niche, looking at where they excel, looking at what sort of personality they are, how their preferences and their likes and their hobbies combine to create their raison d'etre, their reason for living, their wanting for workfulness. I don't believe that jobs are the way forward. We have a number of jobs. We all do jobs. But our workfulness, that which lights our internal fire, that's what I want to foster. Because that fosters belonging. When we know that we can do what we love, and we love what we do, and nobody feels like they're at work, but we're all being workful. So, inclusive education and work environments. It means we also have to have anti-discrimination practices, doesn't it? It means that bullying has to not be okay. It means fostering a culture of whistleblowing, actually, of reporting when things aren't right, of no longer being silent. You know, I was listening to a podcast earlier from a black social worker who talks about the fact that if a black woman goes missing, there's not much of a fuss. But if a white woman goes missing in Britain, well, you know, we get the dogs out, don't we? This cannot be the status quo. We cannot believe that black people should be incarcerated. And by the way, more black people are incarcerated in psychiatric services than they are in the community, it would appear. So even mental health services are biased, bigoted in this regard. But we can't, you know, we can't continue with that being the status quo. Neither can we imagine that it's okay for a school not to have ramp access, and there are hundreds of them still. So we have to foster inclusive environments, education and workfulness environments. That means, employers, that if you have somebody apply for a job, you need to make sure your place is inclusive before they apply, not when they do. I went on placement last year for my social work degree, and there was a ramp access because it was for individuals in wheelchairs. So you would hope that as a learning disability day centre for individuals with complex difficulties, it would be accessible. And of course, the individuals that we supported did have an accessible toilet. They had their own toilets, which were accessible. The issue was I was a staff member and I couldn't get into the staff toilets because they weren't accessible. I'll be honest, as a trainee social worker who was placed in this organisation and couldn't get to the same toilet as all the other staff members, neither could I reach the tea and coffee, and in the entire of my placement, nobody moved it. They just all decided to make tea and coffee around me and offer to make me one, which was lovely, but I decided to take my own in, rather than constantly have to be served and not be able to share. You know, fostering an inclusive environment means just thinking a little bit about it, but also making sure that if you are going to open up, which you have to by law, your employment to disabled people, look round your organisation and tell me, if you are running a business and it's not inclusive and it's not got disabled access toilets or facilities for staff, then I would suggest you need to close today. And I would love some comments. We have to support everybody, actually. And if your business doesn't reflect society, then you don't have a business that's in society, or in my opinion, deserves to receive the income from that society. So what's the second way of fostering belonging in business? Through being an actor. Well, engaging with your community, like I am doing right this minute. I'm not engaging directly with you because you're not here, which is interesting, but you will be later, and I'm going to see how this pans out. I'm engaging in my community, with my community, and I'm trying to understand its needs, my needs and challenges, my challenges and its challenges, and the challenges of us communicating. And how do I get my voice out there? How do I help people foster belonging in business particularly, but in all areas, through these practices. To understand the needs and challenges of my community, I have to be engaged from the bottom up. And I think everybody knows, if you've heard me before, that I believe and I have always taken a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So the top-down is looking at this policy, unpacking it and seeing what actually it intends to do. Because if what we intend to do isn't inclusive, then we're not really going to achieve it. Well, we're not, are we? If the policy doesn't have the intention, we're not going to achieve it. We're not. But at the other end of that, we've got how does that policy from way up there, high, lofty, on high, how does that impact on the ground floor here with us? How does it pan out in education, in work, in business, in society, in lawfulness, in public engagement? How does it pan out here? Here. Because that, for me, the grassroots is where we need to be, because that's grounded in our experiences, yours and mine, our experiences, right? So engagement in my community, in our community, is imperative. If you're not engaging with your community, somebody said to me yesterday, I don't vote. Well, all right, but please don't complain to me about how the world is if you don't engage in the system which creates the world you're in. Just saying. Whatever you think about those people, talking about politicians now, whatever you think about our leaders, whatever you think about the world, your world is part of policy, and policy is part of your world. And if you're not engaged in policy, and I don't just mean watching the BBC, I'm sorry, but we all know that that's not the whole story. In fact, it probably isn't the story. It's a curated story, right? So community engagement, engage at grassroots, engage with your people, get on the shop floor, man. Whatever it takes. That means also, though, that we invest in people. So when you get on the shop floor, when you get at grassroots, when you get with your people and you realise, actually, there's skills gaps here. There's not just skills gaps, there's skills and experience gaps. For individuals, for example, that are first in their family to go to university, there's no knowledge of what that looks like, sounds like, feels like to anybody in the family. That tacit knowledge, that embodied experience, that historical understanding, that golden thread, the connection, the belonging to that environment isn't there for those students. So we need ongoing training and development to allow not only professionals to understand those situations. If you've got a class of 30 and 15 of them, 10 of them, whatever, I don't know why I'm saying numbers, but a percentage of them have families that have never gone to university, have got no idea of that, then that entire arena is probably out of their conceptualization. There we go. It's a better word. I'm not going to word the first one. But that means that we don't just provide training to our students, but to our professionals. And I have to say there are some changes that I think are needed. I think the teachers need to require a teaching qualification again. Require. And they don't, by the way. That's how our education has been devalued. Our teachers don't require a teaching qualification at post-14 level. If we're not being taught to teach, I'm not sure what teachers think they're doing, because we're not delivering subject matter. Okay, we are when we choose to, when we're put into, I'm a physics teacher, but whilst we are teaching and fostering, I believe we should be fostering an inclusive and accepting and inquiring and, belonging society through our education. Being a teacher is more than delivering information. It means that individuals and professionals can enact policy, can act out anti-oppressive practice, can truly include. And we know when it's lip service. We know. And one of the things in the Connecting the Dots policy observation, the next year, 10-year plan, says that we know when it's lip service. We know when it's ableist. We know when it's, what was it? Black Lives Matter. Of course they do. But not to the... anyway. Fostering a culture of continuous learning and adaptation, changing and evolving, and accepting that if the status quo isn't good enough, it isn't good enough and we need to change it. And that's okay. To do that, though, we have to incorporate well-being policies. You know, being unwell is becoming, a bit of a pandemic. There's so much ill health based on well-being. I mean, there's plenty of ill health and disability that isn't impacted by our well-being characteristics, but there's plenty that is, and we have enough problems with disability without having people that are disabling themselves, to be honest. But we are all, in some way, disabling ourselves through the way that we live. So we need, in our seeking for mental health and physical well-being in our organisations and fostering inclusion, and belonging and turning up, it involves us focusing on providing well-being. We need to look after ourselves and each other. Recognising the importance of mental well-being and listening to one another. Literally inquiring after, how are you? When that response is less than complete. Oh, yeah, not bad. Yeah, but how are you? How the bloody hell are you? Because I really want to know. I've really been thinking about you. You've really been on my mind. How are you? How are you? How are you? How are you really? That creates channels for feedback to and fro, the communication flow. That means that we can keep refining our processes. I can work out in my team what works and what doesn't. Next week, I'm planning on getting them to head meetings to the agenda so that as I go on to a very long stretch in February on placement, that they've already fostered a system by which we can support the very many clients that we're helping through workfulness and access to work. If you don't know what access to work, give me a direct message. And if you're a disabled person and you don't know what access to work is, then come to one of our webinars. And if you're a coach and you want to know how to train to become an access to work coach, DM me again, because we're going to be putting some training on. It's very exciting times. I'm just taking on some coaches, and accessibility partners there we are, is growing and growing and growing. We are able to provide that real value at grassroots level to people who feel that our policy enactment is indeed affecting their lives. So that allows our channels, and that's what we're after. That's why I'm doing this. I want to talk to you, with you. I want you to hear me, and I want to hear you. And I want to take this and I want to embed it into policy and practice, because that's my job. So this helps refine and keep improving. And this is what Stephen Ball talks about when he's talking about being policy actors. It's a live, breathing, living organism. It can evolve. You can impact it. You can change it. I know I've been shaping policy for 25 years, and I'm seeing the fruition of that now. This recognises that we are now beginning to celebrate diversity. We are beginning to celebrate disability. We've just had Purple Tuesday, celebrating disability. It's Disability History Month from just now, actually. We are celebrating our freedom from oppression. We will be free. Because I need to tell you as well. This, I believe, when we recognise our differences culturally, socially, our personal backgrounds, our workfulness, our ways of moving through the world, our colour of our skin, the way that we connect, the people that we love, the genders that we are, and those that we are attracted to. then that enhances a sense of belonging for everybody. You know, I've got some news, but I'll come to that at the end. I'm going to talk a little bit about the connecting the dots, because I've just handed in this social policy portfolio, and it's not as good as I would have liked, because I'm a narrator. Although I can write if I do nothing else, literally. If I just did that degree and nothing else, it would be superb. But to have life keeps me grounded. If I go all in on something, just one thing, then I become unwell, because I become focused on it to the exclusion of everything else. So I have to be a little more balanced, and that means I have to accept not so good or not so bad. Okay, enough, sufficient sometimes. And sometimes I don't meet the grade, and that's okay. Last year I had to redo, I think, 2 or 3 or something, assignments, because I'd missed the mark, I'd not connected the dots, I'd missed the brief. And that happens for me. I'm neurodivergent. Sometimes I will go off on a tangent, write my own essay, my own portfolio. So we will see, but I've certainly learned, and I think this recording will evidence that. So this connecting the dots, which is the resulting 10-year strategy policy observation document that suggests what's needed for the next 10 years in Wales, because we've gone from the medical model where, you know, impairment was seen as a terrible thing, stigma, discrimination, exclusion. Just said more black people are in colour of people of colour, however you want to call it, however you want to talk about it, and there's millions of ways, and I'm sorry if I've offended anyone, but people that aren't white are more likely to be incarcerated than those that aren't, right, when they have a mental health crisis. How crazy is that? So this policy, this document, this history, we went from there to the point that everybody realised that there was lots of stigma and exclusion, it wasn't helping, and actually nobody knew what the social model of disability was. We were still in the medical model. My impairment is my responsibility. Society, I should try to fit into society and be like everybody else, 2 legs, 2 arms, eyes, ears, the same voice, able to walk, all that. That I should be replicating. Well, when you can't, then you're excluded. In the medical model, you're impairment. But in the social model, my wheels are not my problem. I can get around perfectly beautifully on all the wheels that I have. I have lots of wheels, as you know. Some of you have helped me get wheels, helped me get a purple sparkly handbike, which I did a marathon with in the summer to create the first disabled entrepreneur, funded entrepreneur. And that's important because we are already discriminating against disabled people when they start in business, because to get access to work, they've got to make the lower earnings limit in the first 12 months. That's just shy of £7,000. And if they don't, then access to work might be granted if they get there on time. And if it is at 12 months, they will be stopped. Whether, you know, even if it looks like a goer, if it's not gone fast enough, it's going to be stopped. But not only is it going to be stopped, that person will be barred for 5 years from access to work. So we've got to change that, and that's why I did a hand cycle marathon. Excuse me, my wrist isn't good. Hand cycle marathon in the summer in aid of the first disabled entrepreneur, because we have a disabled entrepreneurs club, and in Accessibility Partners we are creating disabled entrepreneurs every day, and very often they make their lower earnings limit very, very quickly, and we want to make sure that if there's somebody that's got a great idea, that's got complicated needs, I would imagine this is the kind of individual that we're going to end up funding, who really just can't, in that first 12 months, make that lower earnings limit and is at risk of having that access to work award removed, and has a phenomenal idea that is going to foster inclusion and foster belonging, particularly in business, that will be the first award that we make very, very soon after Christmas. So we are just a few £100 off that lower earnings limit, and we want to be able to award that and then coach that individual until access to work gets here. And it can take anything at the moment between 16 weeks, actually, 1 day and 16 weeks. It's better than it was. It was 14 months. We've taken the access to work deadline, response time, down from 14 months to 16 weeks. It was at 12. They've taken on some more staff now. They're on overtime. So anyone that's involved in access to work, just ask them if they're doing Saturdays. I'm inviting them to do Saturdays so that we catch up with this backlog, and hopefully by Christmas, all of the individuals that we're applying for will actually have access to work in place, and we won't have to be working with them free of charge until access to work get here. We then call our dues, I believe me, but it takes a long time, and it takes them even longer to pay, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But it emphasises this document. I'm going to go back to that. Sorry, the connecting the dots. I'll let you connect the dots in a minute. I'm going to connect the dots now for you. That this policy says that in the next 10 years in Wales, we've got to the idea that the Welsh Government need to understand the social model of disability so we can write inclusion right into the social policy, right into policy, inclusive processes. For instance, in the Senate, we cannot job share at the moment. So I don't know how we get women with children. We don't have a creche. But in policy, women at the top, people at the top can't job share. We need to have this written into policy. Okay. So this is why it's important that on the 6th I go to the Senate with the equality and So it fosters collaboration. It emphasises collaboration. Connecting the dots. The next 10 years says we have to collaborate across industries, education, health and social care, the NHS and social services, and the government and mental health services need to work together, because we can't afford to do anything else. So it also suggests in this connecting the dots, which is the thing I've just reviewed in my policy portfolio, that it focuses on community needs, that grassroots, remember, that bottom up approach, that mental health initiatives are impactful and relevant, so they meet the needs of you, of me, that we're hearing these voices, that these voices and this experience of the IAP service, improving access to psychological therapies, is what the IAP service is actually, we know what's happening. We hear what's happening. We know what we've written. We know what's happening. And we are the policy actors in between. We need to ensure that the things we are doing, and there's lots of funding coming up, particularly in adult mental health and adult inclusion in health and social care, that these policy initiatives, how it pans out at the ground floor, actually is impactful, and that we measure it, that it's measurable, that we get empirical evidence. That's not just the numbers, how many people thought this was good, and what did they think was good, but what happened, what are the outcomes, and how did they feel, what do they say. That encourages open conversations, and that's what connecting the dots says that we need, where mental health can be openly discussed. I am a survivor of suicide. We need to be able to talk about mental health freely. I have attempted suicide a number of times in my lifetime. I have had and experienced a severe and enduring mental health condition. I have received many years of psychotherapy, and I have embarked on many years of psychotherapy. I have trained for many years in psychotherapy, and I still struggle on a daily basis with my mental health well-being. We have to openly challenge stigma and promote that understanding that mental health well-being is a process, a constant process on which the seas of our life float and bob and move, and that sometimes we are well and sometimes that undulates, and that loss and difficulty promote challenge, and that those challenges can be overcome in an environment of belonging, where understanding is promoted rather than exclusion. So, Stephen Ball, who I began with, advocated becoming a policy actor, and I said that we needed to foster belonging through acting. And what I mean by acting is the implementation, the creation, the enacting, and the evolution, the recreation of policy, what joining the dots, connecting the dots is doing. And in the context of Wales, that means fostering belonging and inclusion. To do that, it requires a collaborative, inclusive and dynamic approach, not what we've done before. We need to be listening and evolving and understanding the diverse needs of all of our stakeholders. In Wales, there is no trans teen service. And we know that trans teens, in fact, 74, I think, % of them have thought about killing themselves. 23, I think, it's 20 odd %, don't quote me, have attempted to kill themselves. In Wales, there's something called the Welsh offer, which means that in Wales you should be able to speak Welsh or any other language, actually, of your origin language, the language you choose to speak, the way you choose to express. Funnily enough, as an autistic individual, I'm not allowed to express verbally at university, in spite of the fact that at a PhD level, Aviva Voce is exactly what I do. But at this level, I'm not allowed to tell you about what I know. I have to write it down, even though I can tell you everything much more effectively in this way. So connecting the dots says that we need a dynamic approach, and I think this is a dynamic approach to understanding the diverse needs of all stakeholders, and to recognise that if we don't have the capacity to allow our young trans individuals in Wales to speak in their mother tongue about them feeling excluded and wanting to die, then we are not going to foster inclusion. And in fact, we're going to promote suicide completion, aren't we? The Tavistock Centre's been closed and there's no referrals, and they're being referred back to their referring authority. So kids are bouncing back and kids are dying. Young people are not being seen or heard or valued or supported or treated. Deaf people in Wales, young people, deaf young persons in Wales, if they go to deaf cams, aren't connected to any other of the community adolescent mental health services because they're not able to provide the services that deaf people need. So we know that mental health policy in Wales needs to connect the dots, and it needs to include those very, 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 the most vulnerable people, those people that we know statistics, those things that show what actually happens, show that they are dying and not being included. So therefore, we know it's not working in its totality, but it's gone a long way, yeah? We need to make sure that those ground level services are meeting the needs of our most vulnerable, saving lives. That means we must be able to continually adapt to the changing needs of our society so that we can create a more inclusive and supportive environment for everyone. There's lots more to that policy, but I think that I've explained what I wanted to today, but I want to share some news. Accessibility Partners, the organisation that I founded, and Inclusion, the charitable endeavour that has helped me ride a hand cycle to raise money for the first disabled entrepreneur. I work very hard. Doesn't matter how hard I work. And I have an Access to Work application. And I made this application, the first application, the November before last. And it took 14 months for Access to Work to respond because they were very busy post-COVID. That didn't really help me because I'd been very busy post-COVID. Well, during COVID, I died. I was intubated and it looked like I wasn't going to survive again and again, 3 times actually. But I did. They put a DNAR on me, a do not artificially resuscitate, without my consent. And I somehow got it taken off. It was a long, involved story involving me writing on whiteboards with no and DR, doctor, and no, and trying to rip my mask off, but to talk. when I did come round. And I did stand up for my own rights, metaphorically. But I was rendered, in a hospital bed, using a slide board to transfer to my commode and back, and pretty much not moving apart from that. That was 3 years ago. And I'm glad to say that that's not the way it is. I've turned my life around. And I did it, in my hospital bed. I stated I would. I said I would get cardiovascular fit. I said I wanted to return to work. I couldn't at the time. And I started raising funds for a hand bike. And I went into a room on Clubhouse. Clubhouse is a social media audio app where you raise your hand and go on a pretend stage, virtual stage, and mic and speak your mind and close it. And the other person that's running the room, then feeds back. And it's actually quite frightening when you first do it. And I went into this room and I was already fundraising. I mean, there's a bit of the story that I've missed out here, but let's just get to the fact that I was fundraising for a handbag. And this lady who not a lot of people liked, I have to say, but I think she's delightful, said, what are you doing here, fundraising? Why would you embarrass yourself? I've had a look at your bio, and you are multiply qualified. You're in bed, but you can talk. You're on Zoom. Everybody's gone virtual. Why aren't you Zooming from your bed? Why haven't you got hold of your previous customers? Why aren't you providing them a service? Whatever it is they need, go and provide it. Because you've got all the qualifications. Go and do it now. And then when you make the money, you can buy the bike. And I have to say that I was a little bit taken aback, maybe a little bit hurt, because it took me a lot to step outside my comfort zone and ask anybody for anything, particularly fundraising. And I was raising funds. I was listening back to a podcast just the other day with Pete Cohen. If you want to go and listen to that, it's being a voice for the voiceless and overcoming barriers, I think. But look up Mandy-Jayne Lace on podcasts and you'll hear it. You'll hear the fact that at that point I had raised £1,500, and I say it. I've only got £4,500 to go. I say I didn't. I had £9,000. The bike ended up costing, but I've got one. I've already raised £1,500. I say on the podcast, I can do that 3 times. If I can die 3 times, and I'm here today, then I can create 3 lots of £1,500. You see how my autistic brain connects the dots. So I can do that. I say. And of course I do. So if you want to go and listen to that podcast, I think it's fascinating to listen back to what I intended and then what I've done. Because inclusion and accessibility partners are indeed providing goods and services and promoting the development of new services for disabled people, by disabled people, for the greater good. Accessibility partners will have created over 100 disabled entrepreneurs this year, as we intended to do at the outset. And I want to say thank you, because it was the belief of other people in my cause, this cause of me becoming fit enough to do a hand cycle, and therefore returning to the workplace and applying for access to work and daring to move, and all of these things that have got us to where we are today. I didn't get where I am today without promoting my own inclusion. Reginald Perrin was a fiction show in the 80s, I think. And he used to say, I didn't get where I am today by. And actually, the outset to Reginald Perrin was him taking off all his clothes and walking into sea and never coming out again and disappearing. I think when mental health policy doesn't actually work at the ground level, that's what many people feel like doing. Their desire to exit the world, like Reginald Perrin. Well, I didn't get where I am today by not telling you that that needs to change, because it does, and it is. And my access to work, my creating an access to work program, my delivery of the DWP access to work program, and I mean delivery of it. We deliver it end to end, from the application process to the continuing delivery and expertise of your package. That's what we do, end to end. I'm an expert, over 25 years experience, and I have been providing access to work for my employees since the day dot, 20 years in fact. And I have been part of that process, that program. I am a specialist educator. I am a trainer. I am a teacher. I am a systems analyst. My first degree is IT and computing. And I understand this system from the inside out, up, down, back, front, in, out, me, you, backwards, forwards, believe me. Their policy, their practice, their protocol, and the way that they choose to enact policy, right? Because every single case manager manages cases differently. And I see them all and they don't see each other. So we are in a unique perspective because we see how they enact policy across the board. And so we can tell you where that particular case manager may not have as broad a perspective. That's the whole point of collaborative practices. We have a range of skills and qualifications in our staff cohort: psychology, psychiatry, education, social work, management, human resources, inclusion, accessibility, diversity, pharmacy, you name it. We really are, of course, law, social policy law, HR law. We have a wealth of understanding at our fingertips in order that we can bring this collaborative idea of how we promote connecting the dots together. And I had some news. So access to work is imperative. We are making miracles and you can be part of those miracles. If you want to know how to train as an access to work coach, get in touch because I'm going to be providing just the most fantastic training program. Really, the last 25 years of my experience in a program. Like, there's nothing out there. There's nothing like it. There's nothing available except from me. And I will be providing it. So get signed up because there's going to be a limit to the amount of people I can hold on here. But I will hold that number and I will make sure it's as cost effective as possible. I promise. I promise. I'm not out to rip anybody off. I have no need and I don't require it and I don't want to. I want people to understand, but I do need to cover costs and this costs a fortune. I'm sure people know. If you engage in any sort of social media production, you've got costs. I've got costs. But I'm hoping that front-ending those costs will promote inclusion. That's all I want to do, as you know. And you can, of course, click in my link and go and click on the fundraiser and donate to inclusion because, you know, we want to create not just one disabled entrepreneur, but 100 disabled entrepreneurs. 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, a gazillion. As many as it takes to promote inclusion. And talking of which, access to work and how amazing it is. However, as I said, it took 14 months. Now, not only did it take 14 months, but last April, 8 months ago, in the spring, I treated myself at the very end of my placement because I'd completed my placement on the very last day to go and trial something called an Omeo. Now, an Omeo is the world's first hands-free device. It's a wheelchair type device that I move with my body by leaning forwards and backwards. It's a Segway, basically, a seated Segway. It's hands-free. I can use a joystick, but I don't have to. And it has gyroscopic legs that will land me sturdily when I need to be. It's going to be purple and sparkly. And I was delighted to see it arrive in the country after I chased it from New Zealand for 5 years. I tried to crowdfund it a few years ago in New Zealand and it failed. And then it was brought to the UK and a young man called Christian connected with another man called Matt. They're both wheelchair users, spinally injured wheelchair users, and they created My Adaptability. And we, Accessibility Partners, are funding partners for My Adaptability. We are global funding partners with them, and we help people to access their Omeo if they have found it to be a suitable solution for their seated movement. And I'm delighted to say that after waiting 8 months, after asking access to work 5 times, and sending the invoice 5 times, because if I'd had £24,000, because that's how much they cost, up front, I could have had my wheelchair in August, because it arrived from New Zealand and it was built, and I'm sure the paint has been, the wrap has been applied. It's going to be purple and sparkly, so I could have had it in August. I really wanted it for when I did the hand cycle marathon. I'd have loved to have been able to transfer from my hand cycle to my new Omeo. And to be honest, my dream was that it was delivered that day, but it wasn't. That's okay, because guess what? Guess what? Christmas has come early. And I got the notice yesterday that my Omeo has been paid for directly by the Department for Works and Pensions, exiting a few things. But in the main, it has been funded and all there, and everything is there. Everything that's needed is with my adaptability, and my Omeo is on the way. I am going to have a hands-free mobility device, and I am going to learn to dance in it. Now, I don't think anyone dances in Omeos yet, but they're going to. And I've already met with somebody that's a choreographer, and they are willing to talk with me and help me and promote this. And I believe that not only will I be in 2 years' time, because my plan, of course, is, if you know me and you follow me, is I want to be part of the London World Naked Bike Ride 2025, the summer that I graduate from this particular degree. But in the meantime, in 2024, because there's a summer in between, what I'd like to do is be part of, choreograph, design, create, organise and deliver the first Omeo dance troupe in the middle of London, preferably at King's Cross. So there we are. And my Purple Sparkly Omeo will be part of that, and I will be a trained Omeo dancer. Probably an Omeo trainer dancer. I don't know. It's a new venture, and I have a new device for work. And this workfulness will promote inclusion, and this is being a policy actor. So I believe that we can promote belonging in business through policy, but through acting, through being a policy actor. So if you want to be a policy actor, if you want to create inclusion, if you want to foster belonging in business, if you believe that you are somebody that can make a difference, be the difference, if you're a teacher, a social worker, a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, a nurse, a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, and you want to work with us, then get in touch, because we can train you to be part of the biggest movement you have ever been seen to be part of, and one that fosters inclusion, and one that is being built from the ground up, from the practitioner's voice, from allowing the client's voice to be front and center. You know, Connecting the Dots said that we needed to be person-centered. That means we need the person's voice in the center of the story. Very often in serious case reviews where children have died, it's not that people didn't know what was going on, it's that nobody connected the dots. We have to stop letting people down through this lack of collaboration, through this limited understanding about our cross-collaborative practices. We need to understand each other, and to do that we have to communicate. To do that we have to be together. So come and work with me. And we're coming to the top of the hour, so I'm going to finish at this. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for allowing me just to talk today. I want to foster belonging in business because I believe business is better for belonging. And I believe it's better for us being at the table, part of the table, and creating the agenda. So if you want to be part of that, connect with me. If you want to collaborate with me, please do. If you want to help me with my social media, help whatever, please just get in touch. Anyone that can foster this cause is a friend of mine. And what can I do for you then? Are you a disabled person that needs access to services? Do you know that you want workfulness, but you don't know how? Then just get in touch, okay? Because we are a growing army. We are here to foster that belonging. Do you want to be part of some social and emotional loveliness? Are you disabled? Do you want to be part of inclusion? Because inclusion's going places. We're going out for Christmas. We've just been out to, well, anyway, we're having a great time. We have meetings on a Monday night. We go on Zoom. We do all sorts of stuff together. But most of all, we connect. We love. We share. We have friendships, and we grow and foster relationships. So, with a few seconds left, I want to say thank you. You have been in Belonging in Business. This has just been a broadcast today, and I am very grateful for you being here. I've been Mandy-Jayne Lace. I'm MJ, and I am here to foster inclusion. Belonging in business is important, and so are you. I love you very much, and I want you to have a fantabulous week. Bye-bye.